Now it is my great pleasure to call upon one of my patrons of the dialogue to join me on stage, the great Kerry Schott. Kerry, could you join me for our next episode? As Kerry's coming up, and Cameron Klein was on stage earlier, and I want to pay tribute to the extraordinary leaders who give us a permission slip by virtue of their patronage of the dialogue. Kerry Schott, one of the great bureaucrats, great public servants the city's produced. Cameron Klein, the chairman of Australian Rugby, and he's allowed to have long service leave now, just being fouled, but the man who, poor bugger, the man who helped the transition at NAB to focus on Western Sydney as well. To Craig Knowles, the former Minister for Planning, to the wonderful Professor Peter Shergold, the Chancellor of WSU, and to Nick Greiner, our former Premier. You couldn't ask for five greater patrons to help us as we go forward. I now have the great pleasure of presenting, with Kerry's support, what we're referring to as the Patrons' Prizes. You might see on the program on the back, there was to be one we've had to hold over. The wonderful, magnificent Tim Reardon. We've agreed to hold the presentation of his award over till a little bit longer because as great as Western Sydney is, when there's a heads of government meeting on national security in Melbourne, we had to give Tim up tonight. So we're grateful he's on the watch, on the wall, defending us. Sadly, he won't be with us tonight. But it does give me pause to thank, especially particularly with Kerry with me. I wanted to pay particular tribute to the other great servants of government in the room tonight. I won't list them all, but I don't know who's running the state, but it's pretty much almost every person running an agency, from the Secretary of Treasury down, is with us tonight, across from TAFE, from Land and Housing, the Deputy Secretary of Premier's Department, everybody. So thank you very much, and from all of us, thank you for what you do in helping us rebuild our cities. But we'll come back the next occasion to recognise Tim Reardon. I do have the great pleasure to talk about our other prizes we're calling the Dialogue Prizes for Collaboration. 2 years ago, this prize first went to a combination of Joe Hockey and Anthony Albanese, who reached across the political divide to try to ensure we delivered Western Sydney Airport as a reality. As I said, two blokes with an electorate either side of the runway in the existing airport were very keen to help us get another airport elsewhere, and it was a great achievement. Well, it's amazing what cross-political drive can do. Last year we had the great pleasure of presenting to Dr. Stephen Kennedy, now the Federal Secretary of Treasury, but then the Head of Department of Infrastructure, to Jeff Roberts, he who shall reign supreme in the Western City, the Greater Sydney Commission, and also to Lindy Dietz, who's with us from Campbelltown Council, for their collective work in bringing a city deal to place. What an act of collaboration that was. Tonight, it's my pleasure to recognising a different type of collaboration. Western Sydney only works because of the collaboration that some people in helping us drive the east-west divide. And tonight we're honouring three city blue bloods who in the early days of the re-emergence of the Greater West reached out across the divide, provided their mentorship, their support, their advice to those of us on the western side of the divide to make it happen, who didn't need to and have helped make this growth of Western Sydney not at the expense of Eastern Sydney, but collaboratively as we went forward. So tonight, in honouring those three, could they please join us on stage. Monica Baroni, Chief Executive of the City of Sydney, Elizabeth Ann McGregor, the Director of the Museum of Contemporary Art, and Dr. Tim Williams from Arup, but formerly the CEO of the Committee for Sydney. Please make it up here. Here they come. Monica's got a new haircut. I didn't recognise you, Monica. Liz Ann's not in a kilt. I don't recognise her. And Tim Williams is wearing a tie. Can I just point out, because I love the man, only Tim Williams, those who know Tim, with the brilliant mind he has and sometimes struggles a bit on those other things, not only lost his tie on the way to dinner, he then lost his phone when he got here. But he is also one of the great public intellectuals of this city, so delighted to have him. Kerry, you might... We might.
Kerry says the only time I've ever been called a blue blood.
The only time, yeah, Tim's not highborn, so he's now a blue blood. I'll get a photo of these people and I'm going to have a chat to them. Now, while I've got you, I'm not letting you go without a little chat, firstly. Monica, City of Sydney, it's always had a bit of a colourful relationship with the state government through many years on both sides of administration. But also, you know, Monica was a member of our committee for Liverpool we established and came out and sat and just watched how you worked with your other CEOs across Western Sydney about, you know, running big government. You've watched that change. What drove you into that in the first place? It would have been easy to sit here and say that's an attack on what we've got in the city, but it's not how it worked, was it?
Chris, the reason that I'm passionately supportive of the work that happens across Sydney is that I truly believe that to support Western Sydney is socially just and economically sound. We can only say that we've succeeded when that prosperity and social equity is shared, and that's why we have to work together.
Absolutely. Lizanne, you had the fun of being Mike Baird's Arts Ambassador for the West. I watched how I've sat there with your passion of unlocking Western Sydney's creativity. Remembering, as we sometimes, and with all respect to Monica, I think David Borgia once coined the phrase, it's the only part of government where 95% of the entire budget goes in one LGA, all in the City of Sydney. That's changing. The powerhouse obviously is coming. But what have you seen from MCA in that role you had working with some of your partners in other cultural parts of Western Sydney? What the development you've seen in that sort of past 5 years?
Well, there's a story that I'm not going to tell tonight. There is a story about how Western Sydney saved the MCA. So I'm intensely grateful to collaborations that we built very early on. I came from the city of Birmingham 20 years ago, and within 6 weeks of arriving in Sydney, I went to Blacktown. I have to say, when my PA heard I was going to Blacktown on the train, she was horrified, which was the first time I met the prejudice against Western Sydney. And when I arrived in Blacktown, I thought, wow, it's fantastic. It's just like Birmingham. There's curry houses and fantastic diversity and amazing creativity and interest in the arts. And the then Mayor of Blacktown became a great supporter. It's not about what we do in Western Sydney. It's about how we partner with my colleagues, and my colleague Michael D'Agostino here from Campbelltown and many others. And we're very proud that we've continued to run a lot of projects with artists, with communities, and with colleagues in Western Sydney. It shouldn't be Western Sydney anymore. It's just Sydney. And as Monica said, it is actually a social justice issue. I've always said, why should people be defined by their postcode whether they're interested in the arts? And there are as many people in Western Sydney interested in the arts as there are in the eastern suburbs, let me tell you. Thank you.
Fantastic. Now, Dr. Tim, most people don't realise before Tim came and took over the Committee for Sydney, he ran a thing called the Thames Gateway Partnership in East London that brought all parts of London together, the east side of London together to advocate in many of the ways the dialogue does now for Western Sydney. And when we took the group back, we saw, particularly went to East London, the work John Burton, Tim Williams, held in hero status by people with whom we engaged, and that probably was never recognised enough in London, but we're recognising his work in Sydney. I think when I first met Tim, he hopped off the train coming to join the Parramatta Partnership Forum, said, you got the train to Parramatta from the city in the morning. Like, I've never known that. It was all one-way traffic. Trains ran empty that direction. And since then, the work Tim's done inspiring me and in talking about the metrics of Western Sydney, you need metrics. It's not good, even with all the infrastructure spending. If we don't measure what we're doing, if we don't curate it, we won't get the outcome. Tim, your early days at the Committee for Sydney, it was a big, bold move to reach out and embrace Western Sydney when we were punching on our own out there. Looking back now on the work you're doing now, where have you seen that development of our city like you'd seen East London before?
It was amazing coming to Sydney 9 years ago now. My wife is from Sydney and she's here tonight, and she's my greatest skeptic, by the way. So this is she will regard this as an incredibly sentimental moment in my career. But I think I found three things I think about Sydney. One is it didn't really know enough about that the future was being determined in the West. And I think what's great about being an outsider is that I didn't have any baggage, I didn't have any prejudices, I just thought it was obvious. And so, number one, it didn't require any great insight by me, I just thought it was pretty obvious what was going on in the West. I think number two, there was a moment in time where the Sydney culture said, we're a bit fed up of being second rate, we want to be first rate again. And there's been a huge explosion of enthusiasm and optimism and energy and investment. And I've seen nothing like it internationally in the last 6 or 7 years, beyond politics. You know, it's kind of an amazing thing. And I think the final thing is, people in Western Sydney recognize that people like me, I kind of spiritually grew up in a place like Western Sydney. I grew up in a mining town in South Wales. I didn't grow up in a big, kind of culture. And I think that I recognize, I feel very close to what we're doing in Western Sydney. And I should say, Chris, people should not underestimate what you've been doing and not the Western Sydney dialogue. Seriously, right? Fundamentally. Although I would say that your greatest cleverness is in recognizing my cleverness. We would. I do think that we should, the round of applause I've just induced, you need to buy me a drink for. But essentially, it's been a fantastic experience. But by the way, it's not over. Just to say, the self-celebration is a great thing, right? But do not think that Western Sydney is done. Just because politically and economically it's been great for the last 3 or 4 years, it's not done. The forces of inertia, people on the other side saying, we've done it, now it's enough. No, it's not. It's got to carry on, it's got to carry on, it's got to carry on. Okay.
Absolutely. And to Tim's point, the most humbling part of our humble little delegation to East London was at the end of it, a whole bunch of East Londoners saying, can you tell us how you're advocating in Western Sydney because they've lost momentum in East London? To exactly Tim's point of all the massive changes, the Docklands, the Crossrails, the Olympics, etc., the fact that it's a bit running out of steam and needs to restart is eternal vigilance reminder. It's been my great pleasure on behalf of the patrons to reward and award and honour these three people. I could tell you it seems obvious now in Western Sydney. There's all the momentum, everything's happening. Back in the day, it wasn't that obvious. It was really very hard. So people like Dave Borger and I and others, it was a very hard slog, local government only on our side. And it truly was the support and activism, mentorship and advice from people like these three blue bloods in the city who said, let's do this together, that I think made such a difference. So great. On behalf of my patrons, thank you. Congratulations very much.